From Hell I Rise by Kerry King. This is not going to be a minute-long review. I'm doing a deep dive on this one. Now, if for some reason you don't know this yet, I am a massive fan of Slayer. I'm not one of those first 5 albums guys. I love them at every point in their career. I love all their albums, and they never missed for me personally. So this is the closest I'm ever going to get to reviewing a new Slayer album. You can bet I'm hopping on that. I wanted to review this last week. Unfortunately, I got sick, but here I am doing it now. I'm going to go over the positives first because as much as I love this album, the positives are a quick, short, and simple list. It's got Slayer-esque riffs, Slayer-esque drumming, Slayer-esque vocals, darkness, aggression, everything I want in a thrash metal album. Not going to be for everyone, but if you're a fan of Slayer, especially their later sound, this will hit all the right points for you, as it does for me. And I gotta say, the lineup is good as well. Mark's vocals are fantastic. I know he caught some flack for trying to sound more like Araya here, but I've got no complaints. I mean, 2013, Dream Calls for Blood onwards, Mark really found his voice and has had one of the best voices in thrash metal. And on this album, he just goes a bit deeper and more extreme, more towards the death thrash style that Slayer really pioneered vocally. And for me, it just sounds great. I think he sounds phenomenal. It's passionate. It's forceful. The guitars, they've got Phil Demmel doing some of the guitars here. And I will say there is one aspect of this album that I consider better than most Slayer albums, and that's the guitar solos. And Phil Demmel is delivering on some of these guitar solos. They really surprised me because, you know, it's never been Slayer's strong point, but the guitar solos here serve the songs, right? It sounds like the solo is actually playing off of what is happening in the song as opposed to a random chaotic Slayer guitar solo thrown in as a bit of a token aspect of the music. With those things being said, I will get to the weaker points of the album. And for me personally, the absolute weakest point of this album are the lyrics. And that's not going to matter to most people. I know it's not going to matter to most metalheads because I've heard it over and over how they don't care about the lyrics. Well, I do. And I'm probably in a minority of people who love Slayer's lyrics. Not necessarily when Kerry was writing. Heyman's more interesting. But Araya's lyrics, they usually delve into psychology, serial killers, mental illness. I think he writes exceptionally well. And that brought an extra layer of darkness to Slayer's material that a lot of other bands cannot compete with. And it's missing here. Kerry doesn't write those lyrics. You know, the lyrics here are anger towards politics, but just vaguely, not any specific politics or social happenings. It's just vague anger towards that sort of thing and vague references to Satan, but not like their old satanic material. And there's anti-religious stuff here, but again, it's vague. It's kind of word salad. The rhythm flow of the lyrics is good. I think Kerry writes rhythmically well with his lyrics, but the content themselves are poor. They even go into like boastful territory at times, which is really lame to me. So it's not as convincing. It's not as really truly dark as most of Slayer's material. And that was the weakest part for me. I mean, my favorite lyrics and one of my favorite moments on the album is the song Tension, which is kind of the token doomy, spooky song of the album. Slayer always has 1 or 2 of those on each of their albums. And it's the only song that has lyrics that delve more into introspection. You know, it sounds like someone who is a killer who is thinking about killing somebody. And I like that. It's done well. The problem with the song is it's only 2.5 minutes and the whole song sounds like a build-up. Like it should turn into more like halfway through, and it never does. It's just this spooky, crawly build-up that unfortunately doesn't go anywhere, and it's such a shame to me, because I feel like that song could have been one of the standout moments, and one of my favorite moments, especially with those lyrics and the darkness of the music there, but then it just stops. It's like Kerry didn't have it in him to actually finish a classic doomy Slayer song. Another aspect of this album I'll talk about is that it was more consistent than most of Slayer's recent output, which is a strong surprise. There are only a couple tracks here that I'm not crazy about, one of which being Two Fists, which is a punk rock song, which it wasn't poorly done. I'm just not a fan of that style. It's not what I want to hear when I put on a Slayer record or a Kerry King record. It's fine, but it's like far and below the rest of the songs in the album. But aside from that and the intro, which is kind of just there, every song was hitting. And I mean, there were some songs that had parts that weren't as gripping, but then they would counter it with a riff that really surprised me or a drum beat that was really great. So every song here, as surprising as it was to me, sounds pretty memorable, has some memorable parts, whether that be a really good guitar riff or vocal performance. And yeah, it's a very consistent album. The flip side of that is it doesn't have a single song that's like a 5 out of 5. Every Slayer album, for me, has at least one song that's a 5 out of 5. Has one song that's like, yeah, this is Slayer. This is what I love in thrash metal. This album, for as consistent as it is, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have that one track that I'm like, this is it. This is the song on the album. Crucifixion was almost there. Very, very good song, but it's got like a 2-minute mid-tempo groovy section in the middle that is just not as convincing. And, that brings it down. It's not a 5-star song because of that. Another question I asked myself while listening to this album and eventually rating it is, if this were dropped under the Slayer name, would this be Slayer's worst album? And the answer for me is no. And I think that is a bit of a triumph in and of itself. You got half the band here, and people particularly weren't very confident in Kerry's ability to write without Jeff. And it's definitely not Slayer's best material, but it's not their worst material. And again, that kind of surprised me. And I do think the album is better than most people would have thought a Kerry King solo album would be. The final verdict here, as I said before, this is totally subjective and coming from someone who's a huge Slayer fan. Is this album going to blow anyone's mind? No. Does it bring absolutely anything new to the table? No. Is it exactly what I want in a thrash metal record? Just about. And that's all that matters. The fact of the matter is, I enjoy listening to this more than I do most other records of any genre. And that just is what it is. So for me, I give this a 94.